Hello and welcome to the Self-Wealth Real Estate Podcast with your host, Luke Boyron. Today, I am interviewing my friend, Genevieve Walton. She is a real estate investor in the Ottawa and Quebec areas, and she also runs a short-term rental management business and a long-term rental management business. So today we talk about her experiences, how she started them, how she got into investing for herself, and what she's doing now, what she's going to be doing in the future, how things are moving. She's very creative, and she's been able to do things differently than a lot of other real estate investors. So I think this is a really interesting episode. I think you guys will enjoy it. So please listen in. Hello and welcome to the Self-Wealth Real Estate Podcast with your host, Luke Boyron. Today I'm interviewing my friend and another fellow real estate investor in Ottawa, Genevieve Walton. Welcome to the show, Genevieve.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So tell me, how did you get started in real estate? What did you do before you were investing in real estate?
Well, I started off pretty young. I got lucky. I'd say I grew up in an entrepreneurial family. So a lot of our conversations that we had at the dinner table were about growing your portfolio, growing your self-wealth, and essentially generational wealth, which I think was a very cool aspect of growing up in an entrepreneurial family. So I actually, right out of university, started working for a real estate investment trust. I think I just got lucky. I applied online, found they were looking for someone to, stomp the streets and rent some apartments. And that's where I originally started, was renting apartments in the downtown core of Ottawa. Then I got to work on some really cool redevelopment projects with them, taking, old buildings, fully gutting them, and then re-renting these properties, which was really cool to see the full cycle come together. Then after doing that for a couple of years, I, figured I could start doing something by myself, take that entrepreneurial spirit and sort of branch out. So that's where I started my first business, Short and Sweet B&B, which is a short-term rental Airbnb portfolio. We're essentially third-party management, helping you manage your Airbnb. I did that for a couple of years, got a lot of really cool properties, really high-end luxury properties, mid-quality product properties as well, and then started a long-term property management company. That was my background, and that's what I mostly knew about the industry. And so blending those two together, we do a lot of corporate relocations and insurance placements, I'd say, is the majority of the portfolio right now, and then traditional long-term management. So that's how I originally started in terms of growing the businesses and getting capital in order to start my own real estate portfolio, which started in 2020.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's, I think it's interesting that you were leaving the REIT to do something entrepreneurial, because I do see, when I was in business school, so much of business school was actually pushing us to go, learn to go work for the REITs, right? It was very little of it was actually teaching you to be an entrepreneur for real. It was more about how to work within a company and, be the best asset for them. But even when I was in school, I wanted to do it for myself too. I didn't want to go, work for the big guys. I wanted to learn how to do it for myself. And I find it's hard for a lot of people once they're in that environment to leave.
I really wish I maybe stayed a couple more years. I think they were at that point on the cusp of really they were coming up with some great ideas. And even I see it from the outside right now. I'm like, wow, these are some big ideas that we don't even think, I don't even think at that level of where, they're acquiring buildings of 500 doors at a time, right? These are very, very large buildings that they're acquiring. And so there's part of me that wishes I stayed a little bit longer, but the market was hot for Airbnb. No one really was doing it. No one really even understood what an Airbnb property management company was then. And so that's when I thought, okay, this might be a good time for me to, start something on my own. Hindsight's 2020. If I would have known that, I probably would have gone all in when Airbnb was, unregulated at that point, and be able to really hit the ground running.
Nice. Yeah. I think there's always the ability to stay longer, but that's also how they get you. It's kind of this golden handcuffs. You get good raises every year, and so you're making more and more money, and they make it very hard to leave.
I will say, because I was so young, I really had no money. So it was actually, for me, it was relatively easy. I had no expenses at that point. I, didn't have a family. I didn't have a mortgage even at that point. So for me, I was living in I think it was a bachelor apartment. At that time, it was $825. Really nice, actually, bachelor apartment, but, cheap back then. And so it was easier for me to sort of, take the leap. Also, my parents were very supportive in the sense that, we knew what the entrepreneurial timelines were and what, the mindset would be that you have to put some money in to get, money back out. So I knew when I saw them struggle and I saw them move through that side. So it was easier for me that I knew what, to expect out of that high peaks and low valleys of that entrepreneurial sort of life.
Nice. So tell me a little bit about the short-term rental management side. How was it when you started? How did you grow it? And what's it look like today?
It was, no one knew what short-term rentals really were. I remember people were calling like Airbnb.
What year was this?
Pardon?
What year was this when you started it?
It would have been 2017, late 2017. I really didn't do much actually for the first year or so. At that point, I was still working full-time and starting this up. So I was sort of, getting contracts here or there, had 10 or 15 going on the side, was cleaning them at night and that sort of thing, just to sort of get it started. No one really knew what that short-term rental management company would look like, and there weren't many to model off of. So, even doing your own contract, I found this guy in Texas who had a contract for third-party management. He lent me his contract. I, revised it, was able to send it to my lawyers on that side. So, we slowly started to build that up. And then eventually we got to the point where we were able to, start acquiring more contracts slowly, bring in cleaners that were able to assist us, and then sort of hit the ground running on that side. So it started out, I'd say with, 1 to 10 properties. And at the peak, which was in, I'd say 2019 before COVID hit, we had 257 running strictly on short-term rentals.
Wow.
Daily rentals. So there's been some changes, obviously, because right now there is the regulation that came into play last year in Ottawa. So some things have changed slightly since then. And COVID also changed some aspects of the short-term rental market here as well. But generally what you're seeing in Ottawa is a very stable market. So it's definitely helped on that side to keep things moving and get us through that COVID sort of lump.
And with the regulations in the city of Ottawa, have you found... obviously some of your listings will apply within the regulations in the city of Ottawa, but have you found that it's shifted to, I guess, a much higher percentage of your managed properties are outside of what's technically the city of Ottawa or outside of the area where there's the regulations?
So we're mostly focusing on the downtown core right now and Outaouais, just outside of, or in Quebec on that side. No, yes and no. So, it's just the landlord portfolio has changed and what sort of demographic or that, we're attracting for these landlords is a little bit different. So a lot of it tends to be, snowbirds who are renting their place while they're gone. People who are on sabbatical going, to another country at that period of time, we're renting their properties, or someone who's just, using it for interim housing as they are in and out of whatever their transient situation has changed. So I wouldn't say there wasn't as big of an effect as I thought. And part of that was because COVID sort of, slowed things down and slowed down that process. So people could transition their portfolios to however they see fit. And there's still a big number of landlords who are doing 30 days or more, which isn't considered a short-term rental here in Ottawa for corporate housing or insurance placements, which is a great market as well.
Do you find, because there must be way fewer listings now on Airbnb, I assume there's way fewer listings, and as such, do you find you're able to actually command a higher price?
Yes. And so that's what I was hoping would happen, but you never really know, especially when COVID came in. So it was sort of twofold. When COVID came in, we had a lot of embassy who were coming back and secure places throughout the whole time of COVID. Mm-hmm. So that took up a lot of product. Then you have, Ottawa's weather is just all over the place. So you have, flooding that keeps happening. You have fires that are happening. And so a lot of this product is being taken up by insurance placements as well. And then you have the mixture that there really are not that many permits out there. So I would say this summer was by far our best summer on short-term rentals that we've seen, which was, very, very exciting. And it'll be interesting to see what happens in off season. We just came into off season now, so it'll be interesting to see what happens in terms of the bookings. But in terms of revenue standpoint, they're doing wonderful because there really is no supply in this market for short-term rentals.
Yeah, I imagine. I mean, when I travel, I typically prefer to stay at an Airbnb, especially if it's more than a couple of days. I know Vancouver or BC just banned short-term rentals as well. pretty extensively.
Yeah.
Just before that happened, I went to BC for to check in on some flips we were doing up there to Vancouver, and I rented something. I'm gonna say it was like 2 nights for 200 and something bucks total. It was like a basement apartment of a newly built house, and 1-bedroom apartment. Yeah, I paid 200 and something total. I was looking, the cheapest like sketchy dive hotel in the area was something like 1,400 for 2 nights.
Yeah.
It was.
It is.
You think it was a long weekend too, but it was insane what the prices were for hotels. So.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
And sometimes people will definitely say that Airbnbs are not the cheaper alternative, which is true. If you're getting a very large group in there, it might not be, or if it's a high-end luxury product, right? But you won't see these ever come onto the hotel market. They're mostly competing with, I'd say, the condos or, the 1-bedrooms, 2-bedrooms on that side. These big villas or chalets that people are renting, I mean, they are stellar properties when you really see it. It's an experience when they come to these. Rather than just a typical hotel stay on that side. So I think the Airbnb market is definitely moving into more of a boutique market, and it's definitely moving into like high-end luxury products.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when our Airbnbs, I enjoyed kind of the cottages and the vacation properties because people were just happy going there, part of the experience, and so it was a little easier to keep people happy and get better reviews, I found.
They're definitely happy at the cottages. So that's always, especially if it's a nice, sunny, warm day in the summer, you're getting a great review.
Exactly.
Sure.
As long as the AC works too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I honestly, I think it's ridiculous how much they're banning Airbnbs. They're trying to say it's going to like revitalize or add to the housing stock. And if it does at all, it's minimal. Really, if they let the market compete for it, there'd be more Airbnbs. At some certain point, there'd be too many. Prices would go down. And then you'd find a balance where, the right balance of having good Airbnbs that do well and the other ones that aren't well managed or aren't good properties aren't going to do well. And eventually you'd have a balance where, okay, maybe there's too many hotels and we don't need so many, and it converts some hotels into long-term housing. But instead, the hotel industry hires lobbyists and, the whole Fairbnb, they were backed by the hotel lobby, fully funded by the hotel lobby, which is wild.
Yeah, that's a very interesting organization. Well, we were pretty much head to head on them. We peeled the city back in 2019 for when these short-term rental bylaws came into play. We had delayed the process for a couple of years. Most of that was also COVID on that side. But Airbnb was a big advocate for the Hotel Association on that side as well. Poses as, affordable housing activists. But really, if you ask them to convert a hotel to short-term rentals or a hotel to long-term rentals, the answer would be no, right? So, and that's the very interesting part, but it's all what they've put out in the media, and they're very, very vocal on that side, which, hats off to them. They're definitely doing their marketing on that side. But if people really wanted, to have a short-term rental, they're going to do it anyways. And that's sort of where it comes into the play of regulation, but it also comes into the play of enforcement. And that's something that's a totally different conversation right now.
Yeah. And I know it's going on a tangent, but I was shocked when I found out that the founder of Airbnb is a municipal lobbyist. Like, that's what he does. So he was hired as a municipal lobbyist by the hotel industry to create Airbnb, not out of, because he personally doesn't believe in Airbnbs, but because they wanted him to try to get rules passed for Airbnb, and it worked. And I was just shocked at how much like Airbnb was being quoted in the media and all of that when they're literally being paid to write articles about this. They're paid to have a biased viewpoint and lobby municipalities and get tenant organizations behind them and all of that. It's just, it was shocking to me how much they were able to manipulate municipalities.
And I think it's interesting because people think there's like, mad Airbnbs coming into the market. But what people forget is there are a lot of work. So it seems fun the first, I'd say, 10 weeks. Usually we get a management contract somewhere around, the 30-day mark to the 90-day mark where it's been fun. We've decorated. This was great. Now I have to clean every single or every other day on that side. Something's gone wrong. My pillows aren't fluffed, or I forgot my toilet paper, or whatever it may be. And hosts burn out very quickly. And that's when management comes in where they say, hey, yeah, I totally understand you we get it. It's a lot of work, right? And so it's not that people are mass producing these Airbnbs. The only time you start to see that sort of happen is when you have corporations that have been burned by the landlord-tenant board over and over again. And so they start to move into these markets, and they actually have the infrastructure to support doing mass Airbnb, production. But the average consumer or the average small landlord, I mean, it's a lot of work, and it's hard to keep that up. And that's where you'll start to see them play in that midterm market where, there's not as much work in terms of the daily flips, but there also is a little bit more protection in terms of their, the landlord-tenant board and what that tenant profile looks like.
Yeah, the landlord-tenant board situation is very scary right now in Ontario for a lot of landlords. So it's not, we could get into this, but we don't need to. I don't agree with a lot of the tenant organizations. Let's just leave it there. All right. So how soon after you started Short and Sweet did you start Flex and doing the long-term rental management?
I started that when they pressed for regulations on short-term side, because I knew that I needed to get into that long-term market or that midterm market to help cater to our landlords who essentially would get regulated by the primary residence component. So I believe that was in October of 2019 that I started Flex on that side and kept that one going. Most of that is the corporate relocations right now and insurance placements, and then traditional long-term for smaller landlords.
Like me, because actually I've stayed in one of your Airbnbs once.
The coach house.
Yeah, I stayed in your coach house. I feel like that was during COVID times, actually. I think
yes, and that was cool. I was one of the first permanent coach houses in the city, what I remember. And there's been, I see ads about them and that sort of thing as well. And it's a cute little spot, and I think they did a really good job. It looks very trendy, and it's very cool because in Hindenburg, there's these like driveways that go around the back. So it's really easy for guests to access that property.
Yeah.
So.
Remind me, well, the one that I built 2 coach houses in Ottawa since, both as long-term rentals, and you recently rented one of them.
Yeah.
Which is one that I love too, because you kind of park on the front driveway, you walk along the side, and you have your own gate so it's almost like you have your own house, really, other than parking in the front driveway. It's a corner lot, so you have the sidewalk, you walk down the sidewalk, you go into your own yard, you have your own little house. It's quite small. I think it's 420 square feet, but it's set up as a junior 1-bedroom, but with vaulted ceilings. It feels really nice. And I think cost-wise, I mean, we GC'd this ourselves, so we tried to keep the cost in. But we ended up, I haven't finalized the numbers. I think we're somewhere in the 150 to 180,000 to build it.
That's not bad. It is. It's its own little house. It's like self, and I know the tenant is super happy there because you have a dog, you can let the dog out. You're all on one floor on that side. You're not sharing any sort of amenities or heating systems or that with another tenant. I think it's a really good alternative.
Yeah, it's all well insulated. It's electric heat. We decided not to bring gas for something so small that's so well insulated up to modern code. It's not going to be a very high heating bill. You have your own laundry, your own hot water tank, all of that. So yeah, I mean it's you could have the same amount of space in a condo, but here you have more windows. You have a private yard. You don't have an elevator to deal with. In a lot of ways, it's nicer than being in a condo building, and you're in a lower density neighborhood, which is nice too. And actually this blends in with the neighborhood very well. Luckily, this one doesn't, offend the neighbors, I feel.
No, I don't think so at all. And I think it's a good alternative because there are not a lot of 1-bedrooms in these areas. There's a lot of big bungalows or 3-bedroom, 4-bedrooms, but there's not a lot of 1-bedrooms. And I know it's perfect for her because she teaches close by. It's a great alternative, especially if you're one person or a couple. Looking for a space that's strictly your own.
And you rented that for $1,750 a month plus hydro. And again, that costs somewhere in the 150 to 180,000 to build. So it's a pretty good return on, obviously we already own the house and was renting at the main house, but it's a pretty good return on the build cost.
No, I think so too. No,
it's hard to get
it's a good alternative.
So. Yeah, and of course, so like you're saying, I've stayed in one of your Airbnbs, but you also manage a lot of my properties in Ottawa. So you guys do a great job there. So I'm
great properties, and I know the tenants are very happy in them. So it's on that, and they're in great areas too, which helps. I think that's half the battle with these tenant profiles is making sure that you have a good product and it's in a good area, and you'll definitely attract great tenants in there.
Nice. What do you prefer? Do you like managing the short-term rentals or the long-term more?
I like because you get to know the tenants on the long term. I like that side. What I find very fun is about the short term side is that they're crazy beautiful properties. Some of these, like, you don't even think they exist in Ottawa, right? And then you see them and you're like, wow, like someone really thought this out when they were designing their home or when they were designing their cottage. That part I find, a very cool aspect of the short-term side is these just magnificent homes that you see. But the long-term side, I would say, for the most part, the tenants are really exceptional people and do a great job of taking care of their property. So you develop, stronger relationships with that side. So if we're talking about the houses, I would say it's definitely the short-term side. If we're talking about the people, it's for sure the long-term side.
Okay, that's a good way to think about it. Yeah, I think about the short-term side. The best and worst part of the Airbnbs that I had was, the design and setting them up. I loved it. I loved finding unique things. Like a lot of the decoration I put up in them would be, things that I'd find.
Yes.
Like old wooden vintage skis, and I'd mount that on the wall, or I'd be like, you know what, this one's waterfront. Let me, I'm going to go buy some like vintage wooden water skis that look really cool. And they're like bright, colorful, or like moose antlers, and just adding like organic elements to them too in different ways that stand out. And it's, brighter tiles and things like that as well that kind of make it not look cookie cutter. But the hard part is the 4 different ones, was 4 different designs. It's 4 different, finding antique vintage things and decorations and all the accessories and everything for 4 different styles was also a lot of work. So it's pros and cons. They're a lot of fun to set up, but they take a lot of time to set up well.
Yes, I agree. And I think there's a lot of creative side that goes into the short-term rentals, where really when you're doing the long-term rentals, you want to make sure that you have the exact same paint color, that everything is as standardized as possible, so that when you go into repair, you don't have to figure out which gray it is that you put on the wall in that property, right? So it's a little bit different, especially when you're looking to scale a portfolio rather than just 1 or 2.
Exactly.
I've seen some really cool long-term properties lately where they're doing more of like Airbnb finishes in the properties. And they're fetching really good rents, which is great as well to see that people are starting to sort of branch out of what they would traditionally see.
Are these
and
like,
more
furnished?
No, unfurnished.
Okay.
Got like pink sinks and stuff like that. Like it's
More
cool what they're doing, but you can tell that they're having fun with it, right? And it attracts definitely a fun tenant who loves their space. And you go back in and you're like, oh, this person really decorated this well. So it looks really awesome when the tenants move in too. So just attracting a different type of tenant who's more into that artistic and creative side as well.
No, that's interesting. It's nice to see that there's a buyer pool for that, or pool for that. Nice. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, like you said, like same thing. I actually use the same color for my rentals and my flips of paint, so I know every time, it's going to be eggshell finish, crushed ice color by Sherwin-Williams. That's it. And I don't have to
only once, I find, and then you're like, oh, I forgot which paint that was, and then you've got to go figure it out. And you're like, moving forward, they're all the same.
I used to use a different color when I started flipping, and I got recommended this by one of the stagers, Annie, in Toronto. And since then, I've been using it, and I don't find it's gone out of style yet. Because colors do change. This one is a bit of a gray, a bit of a beige. It's a grayish. But I find that it allows you to tie in with most styles. So when I do like gold accents, it works with that. When I do black accents, it works with that. If you do like more organic, like wood things, it ties in with the browns. If you do a little bit of a colder, maybe more minimalistic modern, then the gray pulls out a little more. So it works with everything. So yeah, you find one color and you keep working with it, and makes things easier.
Agreed. We're doing a 6-plex conversion in the Glebe right now. And it's the same, where we want the ones in Airbnb, but we want the rest to be very unique and, stand out. And it's one where I'm like, oh, it's 6 units that we're trying to renovate all at once. Like, this got to be the exact same color. Like, the only thing we can change is maybe some finishes in terms of kitchen cabinet colors or, vanity colors. But otherwise, the rest, because we'll have to do repairs, especially on the short-term rental, is going to stay very similar on that side. So,
well, speaking of that, let's get into building your long-term portfolio or your rental portfolio. How did that start, and what are you doing now?
So I started in 2020, bought my first property in June of 2020. I bought actually a cottage, which was not a good way to start because at that point it was 2 days into COVID. The market had, was going to crash is what everyone was talking about. So I buy this cottage for $246,000 in like Lac Simon area, which is on the Quebec side here. Appraisal comes up $4,000 short, which at that point we're all like, oh, now we got to put another $4,000, which is really nothing. But at that point we all thought the market was crashing. So buy this cottage, fully got it. It's actually gone through 2 renovations now. It's worth just shy of $1 million. So that was great on that. So I got very lucky. It needed some work, obviously, but it was one where the cottage market just boomed right after COVID when everyone thought it was going to crash at that side.
Yeah.
So I got very, very lucky on that one. And then I started just buying little bungalows, doing SDUs, adding them into the basement. They're re-renting them and refinancing some of them back out.
In Ottawa?
In Ottawa. Yeah, all mine's in Ottawa or Quebec, but already being Ottawa. And then I started buying some in Carleton Place, which is just outside the outskirts of Ottawa, the suburbs of Ottawa, and did the same thing, duplex conversion. And then at one point I started to say, okay, the outskirts is booming right now because people for COVID are moving out of the downtown core. It's not going well. But if you look at the downtown core of Ottawa, it's actually very cheap to buy. It's very inexpensive, especially compared to other cities. So that's when it started to say, okay, this is a really good opportunity for me to start buying some 4-plexes, some 6-plexes in the downtown core, which no one was touching at that point during COVID, and scoop a couple of those up. So that really, I would say, was when I started to get to, a little bit higher level rather than the duplexes and triplexes, when I started to get into the 4-plexes, the 6-plexes and higher on that side. So started to get some of those, did some renovations, some conversions on those too. Flipped a couple downtown as well that people were just not touching whatsoever, and flipped those back out. And then my last one was the 6-plex that had 3 tenants in it, really horrible rents. No one touched it back in the prime of the market. No one touched it when it came back again. And I don't know what the heck I was thinking, but anyways, I bought this really decrepit, pretty much falling apart 6-plex. But the good part was it's actually 2 semis that are attached to each other. So they're both, separate owners on that side. So it turned out well in terms of my financing and those sort of things. And we're currently working on that right now. So that's a big project. We thought we were renovating 3 units because we had 3 tenants. Then one tenant gave her notice to leave with her boyfriend. The other tenants decided to leave as well. And so now I have 6 units that I'm renovating, which was not in the budget whatsoever. So that is where that one stands right now.
Nice. Not in the budget, but probably, if the rents were low, it's probably a pretty positive thing that they were leaving.
It was, I thought it was an absolute disaster of a deal. I would say it was a challenging building because, yes, they're 2 separate owners technically, but one of the staircase to get to one side, you have to enter through the other side. So they actually couldn't be sold separately. And a lot of the lenders just couldn't really figure that out, how this was going to work. Then because the building was such in bad shape, at one point we thought we'd have to go private on that side as well to purchase this property. And then there was just, I'd say moments where you would see more seasoned investors be a little ballsier and probably walk away from this deal. I don't know why I was so attracted to this property because it was a nightmare to close this. It took almost 4 months to get a deal done. And then we actually had to delay the closing by 2 weeks. to actually get this deal done in the end. And it was a nightmare, to put it mildly. And then as soon as I got in there, it was, tenants gave notice, which it seems like they were trying to give notice but I think maybe the owners were trying to hold them in for financing or for the purpose of the sale, which was very strange. And as soon as I got in there, they're like, yeah, like if you buy us out, we'll leave. And we're like, okay, well, like, let's figure something out on that side. So eventually they wanted out, which was very strange. But I think they were trying to hold, the old owner was trying to hold them to their leases. And so, yeah, it worked out, I'd say, very well for me on that side. But I was not expecting to renovate 6 units all at once. I mean, we're redoing all the plumbing, all the electrical on that side. And I'm hoping to make it like a boutique extended stay portfolio on that side. So I think it will be very cool when it's all brought up together.
Nice. Are you going to be able to finance it as a 6 unit, do you think? Like, would you be able to go commercial on the financing?
Probably. It was essentially, we just had to do what we needed to do to get that done.
Yeah.
The appraisal up $200,000 short, which is strange. You're buying a 6-plex in the downtown area for 1.5 and it's coming up $200,000 short. And it's just because the building is in such bad condition. We're renovating it and the ceiling falls down. That was great. I hadn't touched the ceiling at all. All of a sudden it just drops. And they did. They had a drop ceiling that they installed, but by like 3 screws. So once they started, ruffling things up a little bit, the whole ceiling started coming down. It's definitely let's say, tested my contractor a little bit more than I think he was maybe up for the challenge. But he loves these big old buildings, and it's very cool. So once we started pulling the walls apart and that, we started to find old money, old American bills in it, like a money bag in there, a cloak, hat. I think that's really, really cool. And the building was built in 1862, so it's a very, very old building.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is very, very old. I personally, for my personal portfolio, I typically don't buy anything built older than 1950. That's usually my cutoff, because prior to 1950, that's when you get into knob and tube, galvanized plumbing. I mean, even the stuff after 1950 still has cast iron drains, but there's lath and plaster. Even the foundations were different. They're often like stone, rubble, stone foundations, field stone foundations. So a little bit different. But I will do them if I'm doing all of the work on them. Like if I'm gutting it, doing it all new, there's all new plumbing, all new electrical, probably removing if I'm just using it as a frame because it's in a good area, then I'm happy having it. It's more, I don't want to do a little bit of a cosmetic facelift on a really old building, and then I feel like the maintenance is high long term, and that's harder to deal with. So I typically stick to not doing anything older than 1950 unless I'm doing a ton of work on it to get it up to modern standards, and then I know I will have minimal ongoing maintenance after that.
I don't blame you. It's this is the oldest building. I have another one in the same area. The hard part is the downtown core of Ottawa is very old, right? If you look at most properties in the Glebe, they're very, very old. But they're big, well-built, solid buildings, which is, I'd say, the great part of it. And they have such character to them that we love preserving those, keeping the fireplaces, keeping, all of your baseboards and crown moldings and that sort of thing. And it looks beautiful when they all come together. We're really, I'd say, I'm buying right now for location, because that's a really good long-term hold for sure. It definitely was a very ballsy move that I think, I had agents being like, you should back out of this deal. And I always just find that it's going to work out. The good part is, because I do short-term rentals and long-term rentals, whatever's going to make the numbers work at that point, I'll stick in there to make that work, which definitely helps in terms of, people looking at deals from different perspectives on that side. As a long-term rental, no, for sure it wasn't going to work with the numbers that were currently in there. So I think that helps as well. But it's a big building. It's in a, iconic spot. And I think for a long-term hold, it's definitely a great option. I'm actually getting, moving away from my properties that I have in the outskirts right now. I just don't see them appreciating in as much value as I sort of hoped that they would at this point. And I think we can move that money downtown. And, like I said, the downtown core is relatively cheap right now in Ottawa to buy. So I think it's a good opportunity for young investors to start purchasing in downtown core for sure.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think you're right that, I think everyone has some sort of superpower in their investing. And one of yours is, being able to drive revenue through different rental models. And I think you would be able to make properties work that other people wouldn't be able to, and be able to make them work very well through the operations of it. So I think that's really great. So you're saying you're selling some of your properties on the outskirts? And
yeah, I think so, especially the smaller ones. I mean, pretty much when you're buying these small ones, I find that you're just buying for land value at this point, where if you can get into these bigger developments, it makes more sense in terms of long-term holds and that side. So the ones outside the downtown core, we are looking at, eventually selling as the mortgages come up on that side and move those funds down here a little bit more. We do have the Canada and Orleans and that sort of properties that we'll still keep. I think those have good potential, but the ones in, if you're looking like Arm Park, Smith Falls, Carleton Place, that sort of side, I think that boomed during COVID, and I think it's going to be a hard play. And the thing that people sort of forget about is, yes, you have very high rents compared to your purchase price in these properties, but the bigger kicker is your tenant has to pay rent for you actually to have that income. Where if you look at, if you're going more to the downtown core, and again, this is just generalizing, you don't have as many tenant payment issues, I find, once you're in these more, concentrated areas than the outskirts that you're starting to see. So that's also a reason why we're looking to push more to the downtown core. And I mean, the market is pretty stale right now, so it's a good time to buy. So there's a lot out there that you can sort of scoop up, and it's a good opportunity if you're trying to get into the market, I think, this is your time to shine. I think you've got maybe 2 more quarters, and I think you're going to start to see, interest rates drop, hopefully. I'm very optimistic, but that they start to drop. And then at that point, you would be able to, I think interest rates have been so high that you're not seeing builders that have been building the last, 18 months or so. There's not a lot of supply once those interest rates start to drop for people to, buy at these lower price points. I think you got maybe 2 quarters left before the prices start to go up. But again, I'm very optimistic on these things. So,
no, I think sometime in 2024, I think we're going to see maybe not a crazy run up, but I see the market stabilizing and recovering in 2024, personally. So one of the things I see now, and let me know what you think about this, is it's hard to make a lot of just cookie cutter rentals right now work. And in this market with the high interest rates, I find one of the main ways that you can successfully buy new rentals and make them work long term is ones that have big reposition work to do, big renovation projects. And so I think one of the big skills in the current market with the interest rates right now for investors to have is the ability to manage renovations and keep construction costs reasonable, because they are so expensive. So there's opportunities, especially with all the new rules coming in, to do new builds or conversions to 3 and 4 units and things like that. A lot of cities across Ontario are allowing 3 units now in pretty much every detached home, at least, or all the single family zoning, and then and a lot of cities are allowing more, 3, 4, and up. Ottawa's areas where they allow 8, things like that. So yeah, I see it as having that ability to build, convert, renovate is such a useful talent right now. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. I think that's where you're getting some big appreciation value right now. But I think, if I was starting out again, I'd buy that bungalow, that 1980s, 1970s bungalow, put a basement suite in there, rent out that basement suite, and live on the main floor. And that would be, my main strategy right now. Get dirty, get messy, and start renovating for sure. You can learn a lot and from YouTube or, other channels on that side, but you can also just start practicing, just try on that side, and you'll start to figure out as you keep going. I mean, if you look at my first property that I own, the renovations are absolutely horrible compared to the ones that there are now. And I'm sure, in 10 years, I'll look back and say, wow, the ones that you did now are horrible, right? You just start progressing on that side. You keep practicing and things get better on that side, and align yourself with people who know how to do these trades. And I will say a lot of these guys in the trades will show you how to do it so that you can do it again. They're very helpful on that side to, try and get any sort of help that you could do on that side. I have a girlfriend who I find absolutely incredible. She's, extensively handy. She built her own tiny home herself, and it's beautiful inside on that. And I think it was a great way to house hack back in the day on that side. And she's learned so much. And she bought another house in the outskirts, and she's fully gutting it. I mean, right now she doesn't even have insulation, and it's November, and she's like still gutting it, and she's living inside it on that side. It's not graceful, and of course it's not sexy, but she's doing what she needs to do to make it work. And that's why she's owned a couple homes in the last, a couple of years when most people at her age couldn't have the opportunity to even own one home. So she's made it work. And of course it's not graceful, but if you see her do this, you're like, this is actually quite impressive to watch someone do this. So I'm very proud of her.
Yeah, I think that's awesome to learn those skills, and you'll have them forever, or at least the knowledge of it forever. Question I have too is you were saying, house hack, take a house, turn it into 2 units. For me, I love the idea of turning houses into 3 units. And that can be, basically across Ontario, they're allowing, if you want 2 in the main house and then build a coach house or garden suite or tiny home, whatever you want to call it, in the backyard. Different municipalities have different names for it. Or you can build 3 in the main house. And I'm doing that on a house right now in Ottawa, where it was set up as a duplex. The city said it wasn't a legal duplex, but I think they were wrong. I think it was illegal. Like, it was purpose built as a duplex, probably in the 70s, I think. And like 3 electrical meters, kitchen right above the other, like flat roof, like 2 entrances that each walked up and down. It was set up, it was built as a duplex, but the city said it was single family. Anyways, we're converting that to 3 units. And what we're doing is we took an existing duplex. Part of the reason I'm doing this is it had a double wide driveway on one side. It was a corner lot. It's a corner lot, double wide driveway on one side, and a single driveway on the other street.
Okay.
Parking for 3 cars, or maybe 5 cars, but yeah. So parking for 3 different units. So that was, for me, a huge selling feature, because I'm like, I can turn this. Parking can be an issue depending on where it is. This one I can turn into 3 units and have 3 parking spots, no issue. So what I did was there's a 3-bedroom apartment upstairs. I made part of it a 2-bedroom apartment, then cut off a section in the front and made a small 1-bedroom apartment. Okay. And then the basement was set up as a 2-bedroom apartment, and by removing one of the staircases, I turned it into a 3-bedroom apartment. Okay. So I had a 3-bedroom and a 2-bedroom, and now I have a 3-bedroom, a 2-bedroom, and a 1-bedroom in the same building. So I guess if you can, you're pretty familiar with, off the top of your head, how rents are going in Ottawa, would you say?
Yeah.
Yeah.
For the most part, rents are very seasonal in the terms of, if you have a rental to come up for September 1, your rent will automatically be higher than if that rental comes up for November 1 on that side. So we actually did a very similar one in Hintonburg. It was the same. They said it was a single family home, but it was actually a duplex. And then we got a permit and it said it was a duplex. So I'm still unsure what this was, but we converted under Bill 23, essentially to have 3 units in it. So, I'd say like the average 1-bedroom, you're around 1,800, give or take. Depends on area. An area has a full play on this. And then you have 3 bedrooms that, go upwards of 2,500, just depending again on area. But it all depends, on area, quality of finishes, and the market of what's happening and when that rental comes up. May 1, September 1, for sure, you'll have a higher rent than any other time of the season, just supply and demand and how they calculate back out. But most of that is because of the students that are coming into the market, pretty much taking up all that supply. And so because there's not supply, obviously the prices are going a little bit higher on that side. So I'd say if, that option is for, younger investors that are coming in, for sure, that's a great alternative too. And I'm really glad that they introduced that you could have, I know other cities, they're doing 4 units that you can have now in R1 zoning, but let's start with 3. Sure, we got something, right? Yeah. Like, let's something at this point and give that a go. And I think it's a good option for especially generational housing as well, which I think a lot of people are seeing now too.
Yeah. So if you took a typical, let's say a bungalow in Vanier, right? What would a newly renovated 3-bedroom apartment rent for? Basement apartment in
between, let's say, $2,150 and $2,250 in Vanier, probably.
And so if instead I divided that basement into 2 one-bedroom units, how much would each of those 1 bedrooms rent for?
Maybe $1,450 to $1,650, depends. Vinny's a harder market. That's the only thing. It's a little bit different of a market than most of the downtown core. On that side, you've got pockets that are beautiful in there, and definitely and they have pockets that are not as great, that have a lot of potential, especially for younger investors to buy in those areas and do their conversions on that side. So that market, I find that switches off and on, because it's so close to the university too, that you start to see people pushing there for cheaper housing rather than Sandy Hill, or rather than Golden Triangle, Centertown.
Yeah, but I just wanted to show kind of the difference in what you could kind of expect the rent, somewhere around $2,200 for a 3-bedroom, or somewhere around $3,200 for 2 1-bedrooms. So is that extra $1,000 for the same space, but you have extra renovation costs to get it there? I guess that's up to an investor to look at. Is it worth spending the extra money to get there? And I think that extra $1,000 in rent should be worth it, because you should be able to do that renovation for more, but not proportionately more. It's not. I guess you're collecting almost 50% more in rent, but it's not going to cost you. It shouldn't cost you 50% more to do the renovations. So I think that makes it more worthwhile.
The other thing is, with the 1-bedrooms, you tend to see more rotations. You tend to see tenants stay, for their year lease, maybe 18 months or so, and then they rotate back out. So then you have the opportunity to do, a small rental increase at that point between your tenants on that side, and get a higher lift. So you'll start to see there are more transient tenants who are not necessarily staying for longer periods, where if you have, let's say, the Stittsville, Canada, or Leans townhome, that has more of a stable tenant who's in there for 2, 3, 4 years even, or upwards, that you'll see, rather than these 1-bedrooms where they'll meet a partner at that side, or they get relocated for work, or whatever it may be. You'll tend to see higher lifts when you are going to re-rent that property as well.
And that's pros and cons, right? That's good, because you're not as much at the mercy of rent control rules, because you can rent higher in between. But there's also costs to turnover. You gotta touch up a little bit of scratches on the wall here and there. You have maybe possibly some vacancy in between, right? And you have to do the work to re-rent it. So pros and cons. You might be able to get more. You should be able to get more rent usually, but there's also more costs to doing that. So I don't know, a bit of a balance.
Yeah, it depends. It also depends, like I was saying, when it comes. So you're starting to see a lot of people do like leases for 18 months or so that you'll have, full September to September, and then bring them back out in May. So they'll get you to sign, an 18-month lease or a 16-month lease, whatever that may be, and you get like 1 month free, because they want that property to come back if it has the potential on May 1. Or you'll see the difference of they might just sign like an 8-month lease or a 4-month lease to get it back to September as well. Starting to see these bigger companies for sure trying to get it to come back in prime season, because Ottawa's obviously cold, and if you get something in November, December, January, it's a really hard winter trying to fill these units. I mean, it's hard enough just to get someone to show up for a showing at that point. It's so cold. Yeah, but it's also, you're seeing lower rents in those period of times. So if you can get your leases to align to when the market's hot, that's definitely the best that you can see out of those for sure.
That's awesome. All right, Genevieve, let's move on to the section of the show where we talk about our best and worst deals that we've done, which I like talking about, because that's where we learn the most lessons. We learn from other people's successes and mistakes, and hopefully that can help some of the listeners avoid making some of the same mistakes themselves. So do you want to talk first about the best deal that you've ever done, or your favorite?
The best deal I ever did was, I would say, my cottage, because people were very scared. They were very timid during that period of time at the beginning of COVID. And I got a great deal, even though at the time I thought that wasn't a great deal. Put a lot of love into it, renovated it twice, and came out on the other side with, big appreciation on that property. I also think that's my best deal, because I find, this is cheesy, like a sense of peace there, a sense of home there. It's a great place to relax. It's a great place to, spend the summers and unwind. It's also wonderful in winter. There's a fireplace. I just find that place has always kept me grounded. And then because short-term rentals are permitted in that area, The cash flow is incredible on this property right now, and I think it's done very, very well. If I could have scooped up a couple more of those at the time, knowing now what I know now, that I would have. But that by far, I would say, was my best deal. And Quebec, you didn't even see prices really increasing in Quebec over years, but during COVID, especially, these cottages increased, a large amount. And so I got very lucky on that side, and I find that one is the one that I'm most attached to as well. And I find that
you paid $240 for that one.
$246.50.
Okay.
It's I mean, you don't even see those come up anymore in the Quebec cottages, especially waterfront.
Yes.
Not ever again. So.
And how much did the renovations cost you?
About $40,000.
Okay, so very reasonable. It's hard to do anything for $40,000 anymore, I find.
Yeah, it wasn't. And it was the same. We didn't have money to do a new kitchen, so we just painted the kitchen cabinet. So the first renovation, let's call it, was a very much, we did it ourselves. We did whatever we could to sort of, get that to the next stage. And then when I decided that I wanted to, a couple of years later, put it on short-term rentals, that's where we actually gutted the property, put in a new kitchen, put in a new bathroom, and built this really big deck off of it. And, did most of the work ourselves. So that's what saved a lot of that money.
Nice. And
that one was definitely my best deal. Got me into the market, got good cash flow coming out of it, and it's a great, fun place to go to. So it's 2 for 1 on that one.
Nice. And as you said, it's worth kind of close to the $1 million mark. So a huge amount of appreciation there, and it's cash flowing. It sounds like an amazing win. So some of the lessons, it sounds like, not trying to back out of the deal for one, even though the market was changing, you kind of had to overcome those fears. What other lessons would you say you learned from that?
I would say when other people are really nervous to buy, it's a really good time for you to buy, is what I've learned over the last, couple of years I've seen. Do the work, get dirty, do it yourself, whatever you can do to save those costs, especially at the beginning. That's how I think you see generational wealth that's really coming in, and being able to pass down these properties to people too. Holding on to these properties, again, you'll never see something for $240,000 come up on waterfront again. Holding this as long as you possibly can, if you can, and then creating, exceptional experience for these Airbnb guests, where they want to come back, they want to see these properties, and they want to have a great time there. I think is incredible. I think people, when they're looking for, let's say, these Airbnb cottage properties, they're like, oh, I need to spend, $1 million. I need to spend, 1 point whatever to really get a great property. There's really good short-term rental potential out there for the properties that are even in the 4s, the 5s, and the 6s, that you can do, just different decor, different flooring in these, like very simple fixes to get good cash flow coming out of these properties as well. They don't have to be these multi-million-dollar homes to do quite well on Airbnb.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I think doing the work yourself is really helpful. Both because it saves you money, but also just learning what goes into construction can be really, I know it's helped me a lot. I did a lot of the work on my first rental property, and then I worked for the contractor after that, renovating basement apartments with him. So I kind of spent enough time while I was in school in construction to kind of learn the ropes, which have now helped me a ton in terms of managing other contractors. I think a hard thing is getting yourself out of always doing the work. Once you get in, you don't want to become a contractor. You can do it temporarily to get those skills, but I think that's such a useful skill, and the knowledge you learn from doing it yourself kind of goes into it. And you almost can be more understanding of contractors too once you've done it. Like, oh, well, this plaster joint doesn't look great. Can you fix that? Versus being like, why the hell did you do it like this? Well, if you've done it yourself, you'll know, like, your best intentions to plaster perfectly. You sand it and you're like, damn it, that didn't turn out the way I wanted. Let me touch it up again, right? So it's not that easy, some of these things, and you can be more understanding of your contractors and hopefully have a better relationship with it because of that.
I agree. And it's always interesting to me when people are like, well, I'll just paint it myself. I'm like, okay. I see them paint it. I'm like, well, that looks bad. Like, that is bad. But everyone thinks they can paint. And it is actually probably one of the, let's call it the easier ones, but it's the one that people notice, and on a, very simple level. Now, that's it. Not everyone can paint. Yeah. Definitely notice that on that side, but they will try and paint themselves, and it's just an absolute disaster to see that side. But you just got to keep painting. That's the thing. You keep going through, and it might not look great the first time, but probably the second time will look better, and just keep pushing through, and eventually it will all come together on that side.
Nice. I agree. So let's move on to your worst deal you've ever done.
Oh, I think I've made the best out of them, which is maybe why I don't, at the time, it was for sure the worst deal, was the sixplex. Just very challenging to get the deal done. It took over 30 days to negotiate a price point with the sellers. Like, you should see that agreement of purchase and sale. There was like 40 signatures. It was bad. Like, at one point, my agent was like, okay, we're going to scrap this old one. We're going to start fresh because there's too many signatures on this for this to get done. I would say it was that one. The appraisal came up $200,000 short, so I had to make up the difference between those two. That wasn't graceful. The building was in very bad state, so I knew there was at least $400,000 of renovations to go through, and that's when I thought there was only 3 units to renovate, not 6 units to renovate. It was very hard just because of the way that the financing was doing, whether it was commercial or whether it was residential, whether these were 2 separate properties or not separate properties. And I think the interpersonal conflict between the two, myself included, and the seller were challenging. I think the sellers maybe knew that they had a gold mine in their pocket, and I kind of knew they did too, but it was finding out what that price point was that would make sense with, the current rents that were coming in. If I would have known that it was going to be vacant, that property was worth way more than I paid for sure. Did I know that at the time? Definitely not. I had a tenant paying $600 in rent for a 1-bedroom apartment, right? So that's where it's much more challenging to figure out what the value of this is. But what I did know was no one was putting offers on this place. No one was touching this place. And even in the heat of the market in 2021, when they listed it, no one was touching this place either. So I knew this was going to be a challenging one to get it done. But what I learned on that one, I think people are hard on real estate agents. I think they don't understand their commission payouts. And I know there's been a lot of talk about that in the news lately too. And I don't think they understand actually how much work they're doing on the back end until a deal goes very bad. And then you can start to see how much these guys are actually pushing on the back end to get these deals done. And truthfully, I have a very, very strong agent who represents me on the buy side right now. And if it wasn't for her, and if it wasn't for the selling agent, I probably would have backed out of this deal. But they were very supportive through the whole process. They knew that this was a good property down the road and a good long-term hold. And I think, they very much so advocated for me of what this would be. And I'd say people are hard on these agents in some respects. And until your deal goes bad, you for sure do not know how important these agents are and how much they are actually advocating for you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a good agent's worth their weight in gold. The problem is there's a lot of bad agents out
there. There is, for sure. And I think that's in any, you could say there's bad contracts too, right? Yeah. I have a great contract.
Yes.
So it all depends on who you're aligning yourselves with. Yes, if you're buying, let's say the single family home, maybe you don't need an agent on that side. Or if you're a very well-seasoned investor, maybe you don't need one. I will say if it wasn't for those 2 agents, though, that deal would have never happened because I needed that buffer between the two in order for us to communicate what was happening on that side. And that's why I would say that, for sure, they 100% earned their commission on this one. This was bad. But they were very, very helpful on that side. And I understand that, an agent isn't for everyone too.
Yeah.
So, but I got lucky on that side.
Yeah. I find, again, good real estate agents are worth their weight in gold. But a lot of realtors end up spending the majority of their time trying to find clients because they do make very good money when they find clients. And I think that's a little bit, I think there is room, and this is not an attack on realtors, where commissions could be lower and still properly reward agents for their work. If there were fewer agents, but they spent more of their time actually working with clients and less of their time trying to find clients and marketing for clients and all of that. And you see that of a lot of the busy agents, like the ones who have a deep roster of clients. they're just working with their clients all day. They don't need to be out there, marketing a ton because they're just working with their clients all day. And they're busy with that and they're doing the realtor work. Whereas you see other agents who are spending all day just looking for clients. So I thought like we flip in BC and they have a different model for commissions over there where they charge, it's 7% on the first $100,000 of sale price. And it's 2.5% thereafter. That's pretty typical.
Interesting.
So instead of doing 5%-ish across the board, right? So on that, $1 million sale in Ontario is typically about $50,000 in commission plus HST.
Right.
In BC, it's $7,000 on the first 100, and then 2.5% on so 22. So was that? I think it's 29.5. If my math isn't off, I think it's 29,500 in commission as the standard commission on $1 million. And to me, that makes sense because you do the most work just to set up a listing.
Yes.
Like that, paying a larger amount on a lower listing percentage-wise actually makes sense. The 7% on the first 100,000 makes sense. But then, the work of selling an $800,000 property versus a $1.2 million property is not 50% more work.
Right.
And so it does make sense that I like the model out in BC is all I'm saying.
I like that too. And I mean, you see agents, they're more flexible, I'd say, on pricing. You saw, auction facilities come in that, made things a little bit different. I think that industry is changing. And I think, make hay when the sun shines. And right now you can see some people out there hustling too. And those I would say are for sure the agents that you want to align with who are out there still pounding the pavement, trying to get deals done right now. And when it's, harder than ever, I'd say, to get some of these deals done. And I mean, a hustler will always keep going. Like that's the way that it's always going to be on that side. And it's interesting to see some of these agents really working out there right now. And it's interesting to see some agents who are not working right now too.
Exactly. Yeah. So before we move on, what would you say the top lessons were from this sixplex?
Understand what capital gains tax is. I know a lot actually about capital gains tax after this this property, for sure. I know more about calculating it. I know more about understanding it.
Was this because it was relevant to the seller?
Yes. And how the division of the two sides would be split. They also now know what capital gains tax is too, so that was interesting to watch on that side too. Yes, so understand what capital gains is, how it impacts the seller on these larger purchases if it is owner occupied, which is very strange. You wouldn't see usually a sixplex with an owner occupied portion of it usually anymore. And having good agents that represent you if you are using an agent. And my biggest lesson is always the buy is more important than people think. So what price you purchase that property for is very, very important. And that's why I love seeing like what you're doing in terms of wholesaling and to that sort of side. There's some really good properties that you can scoop up for, cheaper pricing on that are good. Like I see them pop up. I'm like, oh, that's a good property for someone to grab on that. And then the other part is when people are fearful, it's a great time for you to buy. And I think right now is a really good time to purchase. If you have the ability, purchase as much as you possibly can right now. I think, in a couple quarters, you'll be really lucky of what you've purchased.
I agree. I think it can be a good time to buy right now. There's in a way it's harder, but there's also can be some better opportunities out there if you're really looking right now because not everything's selling as easy as it was before. There's some more opportunities because of that. I think the part you were saying about the capital gains extends almost beyond that because I think part of the lesson is it's not just about, necessarily the price you're paying. If you're trying to figure out how to solve a problem or how to benefit the seller, you're going to do way better. So you didn't just go, oh, well, their taxes is their problem. This is my offer. You're like, okay, how can I help their situation so they maximize what they're going to net out of it, which might mean, they're paying a little less in taxes and I can get a little bit of a better price. So you're looking at kind of how to benefit the seller and making it more of a win-win.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's a good takeaway from the whole capital gains part because you're trying to help the seller, but it also ends up helping yourself.
And there's a lot of people trying to sell properties that they actually have to sell right now, which is you have more negotiation power than I think you've seen in a long time to go in. And I mean, start looking at these listings that have been up for, sometimes years, but at least months.
Yeah.
And they're start looking at people that have to get rid of them, and listings that you guys have posted as well on that side. Like, there's some really good opportunities to scoop up some good product right now, especially downtown core, especially inside, Ottawa suburban areas as well, that you're starting to see pop up. Again, like, I'm not saying it's cheap, but compared to other cities, this is a very stable environment at relatively cheaper pricing than you'll see.
Exactly. Okay, let's move on to the final segment of the show. First question I have is, what has changed about your approach to real estate investing with your experience?
The ability to do things yourself now has definitely changed. And ability to understand creative financing has changed as I've progressed. I think everyone talks about how, private lending and those funds are high, and they are high, but you're also getting properties that, a traditional bank will never touch with a 10-foot pole. And you're making really good money off that. And also learning of times when you should dump properties or flip properties that make sense for your longer term portfolio. There's some good money in flipping properties too. On that side. A ton of work. Of course, they're a ton of work, and you guys know that. Yeah. But there's some really good properties that people are passing up because they don't meet a traditional model that they're so used to on that side. I mean, think outside the box, do some, renovations and get some good rents into these properties. It's likely that another investor who's looking for, a turnkey model, or a home buyer who's looking for, a turnkey property who doesn't maybe have those skill sets will purchase these properties on that side as well. So studying the market, seeing what's going on day to day, and it's changing a lot right now, and then seeing what you can do with your current portfolio to move some funds around or move some properties that will help you, with your long-term hold strategy, if that's what you're looking for.
Okay, next, if you could go back in time, what's one piece of advice you'd have for a younger you?
Buy more properties.
Good advice.
So one, it's always interesting to me because I wonder what's happening, and I don't know why. Maybe it's like late at night I start thinking of these things. What's happening with the people who said that when property, interest rates would go up and property prices would drop? Did those people buy? That was always, they kept talking about that and saying, I find that those were the people that were never going to buy anyways. Like, they just could never get on the pony and make this happen. I wish I would have maybe got on the pony, or whatever that saying is, back in the day a little bit more, because there was for sure some good properties back in early 2020 that were worth a decent amount of money. And I should have bought more, which is why now I'm it's a slow and steady approach. I'm not buying a ton of property on that side, but making sure that if a good deal pops up, have some funds ready to go to buy that property, because they will pop up.
Yeah. I think there's at every time in the market, there's excuses, and at every time in the market, there's opportunities. And if you're a person who's always looking for opportunities, you'll find them in any market. And if you're a person who's always looking for excuses, you'll find them in any market. So
I agree. And I'm unsure why I'm staying up late at night trying to figure out if these people actually bought, but I don't believe that they did buy. I really don't. Now I think it's like you exactly said. I think it's another excuse of why they can't. And then there's ways to get into home ownership. If you see people out there, they're taking on part-time jobs, they're doing other creative methods to get into the housing market, and of course it is challenging to get in there, but there's some really good opportunities right now. And so I'm hoping the people that were waiting for prices to drop, they have dropped, and now is a really good opportunity for them.
All right, last question is, what is the most overlooked or the most overhyped investing strategy right now?
Oh, the single family home in the suburbs. Stop buying these townhomes, like these single family home, new build townhomes. I can't understand. I see it over and over again. They buy for, there is some simplicity to them because they're brand new, but they don't cash flow. The appreciation value isn't really there. And there's a million of them on the market, but there's a lot of investors who have bought these single family townhomes as investment properties. That's not going to, the rents will never cover this, never, ever on that. But for some odd reason, I still get calls all the time about these properties. And then they're concerned of why they can't cash flow. And I'm like, well, your mortgage is at $5,000 and the rent in this area is $2,250.
Yeah, you're not even close, right?
We're close. And then you have obviously all your other expenses on that. But there's a lot of people that bought into that model of getting that. And now on variable mortgages, it's even harder. So I think that's one of the most overrated parts I start to see in people's investment strategies lately, which is, I think there's a lot of resources out there to assist with getting into multifamily and taking that approach as well.
Nice. Okay. Thank you so much, Genevieve. If people want to find out more about you, find out about where they can find out about Short and Sweet and Flex Property Management, or just follow along with what you're doing in real estate, where can they find you?
Yeah, they can find me on flexproperty.ca or shortandsweetbnb.com, or Jen and Jerry, which is my cutest little dog in the world that I have. And you can follow me on Instagram and see what we're doing in terms of flips and acquisitions as well.
Nice. Awesome. Thanks so much, Jen.
This was lots of fun. It's great to chat with someone about real estate, what's happening in the Ottawa market, and everything that's happening in terms of generational wealth and self-wealth.
Thanks so much, Jen. See you later.
Thanks. Bye.